Chloe and I are taking a last-minute trip. Just a little business, you know? The words hung in the air, a strained casualness that fooled no one. It wasn't the sight of their matching designer luggage that gave me away, nor the sly, conspiratorial smile Chloe shot him from across the marble foyer. It was the complete and utter lack of surprise I felt. I wasn't angry. Not in the way they expected, at least. My husband, Mark Harrington, a man who had perfected the art of passive-aggressive neglect over a decade, looked at me, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. He expected tears, a tantrum, perhaps a cold, cutting silence. He saw none of it. Instead, I simply smiled, a thin, knowing smile that made him shift uncomfortably. Chloe, my so-called beautiful cousin, who had spent the last 2 years systematically inserting herself into every aspect of our lives, from my closet to Mark's calendar, looked at me with a smirk. She was a vision of perfection, long, honey blonde hair, an hourglass figure she flaunted in clothes a size too small, and a saccharine sweetness that hid a heart of pure poison. She thought she had one. They both did. Have a wonderful time. You too, I said, my voice as calm as a placid lake. I'm sure you'll have a lot to discuss. Mark's jaw tightened. Chloe's smirk widened. They didn't see the glint in my eyes, the sudden, fierce clarity that washed over me. They saw a woman broken, a victim left behind. What they didn't see was a woman who had just been handed the perfect weapon. For years, I had lived in the shadow of my husband's ambitions and his father's immense wealth. Mr. Alistair Harrington was a titan of industry, a man who had built his empire with cold calculation and merciless resolve. He was also a widower, a single father who had poured all his love and attention into his business, leaving his son to grow up in a gilded cage of expectations and neglect. Mark had always desperately sought his father's approval, but he was a perpetual disappointment, a weak imitation of a powerful man. This was my opportunity. The moment they stepped out the door, and their car pulled away from the curb, I reached for my phone. My fingers, steady and precise, dialed a number I knew by heart. Mr. Harrington's office, a crisp, professional voice, answered. "Hello, this is Amelia," I said, my voice laced with a tremor I didn't feel. "Is Alistair available? I'm terribly worried about Mark." I knew the effect this would have. Mr. Harrington despised any sign of weakness or familial drama, but he was also a man who valued loyalty and appearances above all else. He was a man who, at 72, found himself profoundly, achingly lonely. I knew this because I had made it my business to know. An hour later, I was sitting across from him in his sprawling penthouse apartment. The city skyline, a glittering, silent witness to my performance. He was an imposing figure, his silver hair a stark contrast to his dark, piercing eyes. He listened impassively as I spun a tale of concern and confusion. "He said it was business, Alistair," I said, my hands clasped together in a show of distress. "But he and Chloe, my cousin, they were so secretive. I'm just so worried for him." He leaned back in his leather chair, a cynical glint in his eye. "Mark is a grown man, Amelia. He can handle his own affairs." "I know," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "It's just, he's so easily swayed, so impressionable. And Chloe, she's very ambitious. I just worry that she might take advantage of his good nature." This was the key. I wasn't attacking Mark. I was painting him as a naive, vulnerable man, a sheep being led astray by a wolf. I was speaking his own language, the language of business and predation. He respected a good strategist, even in a woman he had long dismissed as little more than Mark's pleasant, but uninteresting wife. Our conversation drifted from Mark to his business, and then, subtly, to his life. I asked him about his latest projects, showing a genuine curiosity that he hadn't seen in years. I listened intently as he spoke about his late wife, about the loneliness of living in a house built for a family he no longer had. "It's a different kind of ambition, isn't it?" I said, staring out at the city lights. "Building an empire is one thing. Building a life, that's another." He looked at me, truly looked at me. For the first time, he saw not a victim, but a survivor. He saw a woman who understood him. The night unfolded with a quiet, careful dance. He poured us a rare bottle of wine. We talked for hours. The easy flow of conversation, a stark contrast to the stilted silence I had grown accustomed to with Mark. He saw my intelligence, my understanding of his world. He saw the strength I possessed, a strength he had always wished his son had. By the time the stars began to fade and the first hint of dawn colored the sky, I was no longer a worried wife. I was a confidant. And by the time the sun fully rose, I was something more. I was the woman who had brought light back into his lonely life, the woman who had made him feel alive again. The seduction wasn't in the physical act, it was in the complete and total capture of his mind, his heart, and his trust. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing with a new message, a flight notification for Mark's return. I smiled to myself, a true, triumphant smile. My husband was coming home a day early. He had underestimated me, just as he had underestimated his father's need for a partner, for someone who truly saw him. I was finishing my coffee when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a disheveled, terrified Mark standing on my doorstep. He was pale, his eyes wide with a frantic fear I had never seen before. Chloe was nowhere in sight. Where is he? Mark's voice was a shaky whisper. Alistair. He's in a meeting, I believe, I said calmly, as if I hadn't just spent the entire night with him. You're back early. Business must have gone well. No, he stammered, his hand trembling as he held up a single, folded piece of paper. Chloe. She sent me a photo. He saw us. Someone must have told him. He pushed past me, his eyes darting around the apartment, as if his father might leap out from behind a curtain. He was a pathetic sight, a man stripped of his carefully constructed arrogance. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing a cookie, not a man who had betrayed his wife. What is that? I asked, gesturing to the paper in his hand. He handed it to me, his fingers brushing against mine, clammy and cold. It was a revised copy of Alistair Harrington's will, dated just this morning. I unfolded it slowly, my eyes scanning the legal jargon. And there it was, in black and white. He had removed Mark as the primary beneficiary. He had disinherited him completely, citing moral and professional failings. In his place, a new heir was named. It wasn't Chloe. It wasn't a charity. It was me. I looked up at Mark, my gaze colder than the winter wind that blew through the city's streets. He was trembling, a hollow shell of the man who had left me just yesterday. He had come home expecting to be forgiven, expecting me to be his emotional shield against his father's wrath. He had come home with the proof of his ultimate failure. I told you I was worried about him, I said, a dangerous calm in my voice. I was just looking out for your best interests, darling. I folded the paper and tucked it into my pocket, the crisp edges feeling like a key to a new life. He hadn't just lost his wife, he had lost everything. And I hadn't just gotten revenge. I had just taken my first step toward building an empire of my own.